Okay, now it's working. Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Awesome to be here. My name is Malena Ronstedt. I'm the co-founder of the Data Union DAO, and today I'm going to be talking about the past, present, and future of DAOs. And I think what's mostly fascinating about this topic is when we look at defining what a DAO actually is. Because we have all heard of DAOs. I think everyone here in the audience knows what it stands for, Decentralized Autonomous Organization. But what does that actually mean? I think everyone has a very different idea of what that means and how a community revolves around that, or if DAOs are maybe more like a company. And I think in order to get a better understanding of the future of DAOs and where DAOs are headed, we might need to take a look at the current sort of landscape of DAOs to understand what DAOs actually mean in the present day, and also what DAOs have meant in the past. So first of all, if we look at the clicker isn't working. How can I activate the clicker? Oh, now it's working. Great. So first of all, if we look at the past of DAOs, so initially the concept of DAOs was introduced in 2013 in a blog post by Vitalik Buterin in the Bitcoin magazine, where he first mentioned DAOs and kind of voiced some ideas around what DAOs could emerge into. And then later on, he also further introduced the concept in the Ethereum white paper, where he defined DAOs as long-term smart contracts that contain the assets and encode the bylaws of an entire organization. So here, DAOs are really a lot more defined as something that is on-chain, auto-executable code, and where the innovation is especially on how funds are being managed, and not so much on the community side of things. But interestingly enough, back then Vitalik also introduced DACs, so decentralized autonomous corporations and decentralized autonomous collectives, but he also introduced decentralized organizations, so DAOs. And I think that's really what we're seeing mostly today, are groups of humans getting together where humans have to decide and coordinate around governance decisions before actually a decision is being made on chain. And that's what back then was termed DAOs, but that's what we probably nowadays mostly understand as DAOs. And back then, he also defined several different use cases for DAOs. And the two big ones that were defined back then were DAOs that build something together. So the idea is that a DAO here functions more like a company, essentially. And the other idea was that DAOs that fund something together. So they don't really build together, but they're investing together into something that is then being built by specific individuals. And then speaking on the history of DAOs, I think one very important event here is probably the DAO. Probably some of you have heard of it. The DAO was an investment fund, a decentralized investment fund that was started in 2016 and that had raised a 9-figure sum to invest into the Ethereum ecosystem. And eventually the DAO got hacked, and that eventually led to the hard fork of Ethereum in 2016. And what's really, really interesting about this one, even though the DAO is not around anymore, but obviously the contributions that have been made back then are all fully on chain, and you can see which wallets participated back then. And because of that, you can kind of re-incentivize this community to come together. And there is a project that is called Hey Anon, and they are now leveraging this really old community from 2016 to contribute to something entirely new. So if you have been affected in 2016 by the DAO hack, then you can actually participate now in a new group that lets you tell your story from back then, and that is all fully insured. Well, kind of the validity of the fact that you have been affected by that hack is all fully insured by zero-knowledge proofs. So there is a Twitter page where you can go, which is called Ethereum OGs, and then you can kind of learn how you could get involved there and then tweet about your experiences. So someone has done this here. You can probably not read it from back there, but it says, oh, you're telling me the DAO was hacked, which is obviously ironic because the person got involved there because they were involved in or affected by the DAO hack. Yeah, and I think this really shows like how it is very important to have these communities on chain and to have the visibility on chain as well for communities. So this kind of led then to sort of a first waves of DAOs around 2017 to 2019, where a lot of co-investing DAOs emerged. And of course, that's only like a little snapshot of what has been happening back then. Today, we have so many co-investing DAOs, they probably wouldn't fit all on this slide. But back then, we only had a handful of them. So we had Metacartel, Gitcoin, which is probably now one of the biggest kind of crowdfunding opportunities in the crypto space to build public goods. And we also had Moloch DAO. And those were kind of the first DAOs that really formed after the DAO hack, and that kind of proved that it is possible to have these on-chain communities to distribute funds and to have anonymous contributors come in together and organize together. And then really in 2020, we have this Cambrian explosion of DAOs. So suddenly the ecosystem really grew beyond scale. And what's interesting here is, I mean, there are so many projects, and they're certainly not all on this slide, but what I want to demonstrate here are sort of the different categories that we're seeing in the DAO space that have now emerged. And the projects on here are really more examples than anything else. Because I think, well, as I said initially, most DAOs started out back in the days as kind of like co-investment DAOs. But we're now really seeing like a lot of other DAOs that have formed around new use cases. I think one of the biggest ones is protocol governance. So for example, we have the big protocols like Aave or ENS that are using DAOs to govern really the development of the protocol. Token holders, no matter who they are, can make proposals and ask, hey, should the protocol go in this direction? Maybe we should have that integration. And then people vote on this. But actually the people who vote on this and who make those proposals are not necessarily the ones who are building it. And the funny thing is also that the ones who are building it are often not paid in DAO tokens or in crypto, but they're often paid in fiat. So if you're an Aave employee, the DAO will decide what you're building, but you're getting paid in fiat money eventually for your work. And what's also interesting then on the protocol side of things, there has been this emergence of grants DAOs. So there is the Aave grants DAO, or there is the Polygon grants DAO, that are sort of completely removed from the development of the protocol. So for example, the Polygon grants DAO is only for grants, whereas Polygon, the company, is fully centrally governed and has nothing to do with DAO governance. And I think one of the biggest category that has emerged over the last 2 years is sort of the emergence of on-chain communities. So we have, for example, co-working, like in the developer DAO or her DAO, or co-learning, like in the Bridge Builder DAO. We have co-ownership DAOs that are focused around physical possession and the physical governance of, for example, co-working spaces, or there's Cabin DAO that owns collectively different cabins around the US. And then we also have DAOs that are purely around co-enjoyment, so Pizza DAO or Dog DAO, which are really so different from the DAOs that are governing the development of software. They're really more just like an on-chain community that could be a Facebook group, or that could be a Telegram group, but that has decided to organize themselves in a DAO, which I think is a really interesting development. And then the last category, which I see emerging, are DAOs as internet LLCs, or DAOs as companies. So these projects are organized as DAOs, but really the focus is not so much on being a DAO. They're just building software. So for instance, there is a project there called Sarcophagus, and they're building mechanisms for crypto inheritance. And they also happen to be a DAO, and all their contributors are being paid in crypto. Some of their contributors are anonymous. All their funding has come in crypto, and they're living fully on chain, so to say. And some projects that have immersed as such, for instance, Sushi and SushiSwap. The Sushi DAO has now recently voted to actually go back from being a DAO into the meat space, so to say. So SushiSwap started out as a DAO, and now they recently voted, I think like a month ago, that they wanted to be a Panamanian corporation and a Cayman corporation, because apparently they see more benefits in no longer being a DAO, only on chain, but also to have like sort of a legal embedded structure. And then there is the opposite example, the Data Union DAO, the DAO I co-founded, where we're starting out as a legal entity, but ultimately our end goal is to become only on-chain and like to be only present on-chain and to dissolve the legal entity eventually. And that brings me to my next point. So the question really is, why are we building DAOs and why do we need DAOs? The other day I gave a talk to more of a normie audience and they didn't know what DAOs were and what crypto is. And they kind of struggled with the concept and they were like, why do we need those DAOs in the first place? And I think the question is really fair enough. Because you can just incorporate a normal company, you can have shareholder agreements, you can just vote in a normal company. That's all completely possible. But I think the innovation with DAOs really just goes beyond that everything is on chain and immutable and transparent. The innovation in DAO really is that anyone can participate, so that it's really a lot more of a meritocratic approach, and that really goes back to the early days of what the internet was back in the 90s, when this really famous meme emerged of online, nobody knows that you're a dog. And the same goes for DAOs. If you're a DAO contributor, you can contribute anonymously. Nobody will know who you are. And we're really kind of seeing an emergence where we're like favoring ideas over people, and we follow ideas instead of following people. And I think that's really a trend that will get propelled even more by more recent innovations in the DAO space. So for example, some of you might be familiar with Nouns DAO, which is sort of more like a co-investment DAO. And they recently introduced a mechanism for anonymous contributions and anonymous voting. What that means is, right now, if you're a DAO contributor, you still have to sort of dox yourself to some extent. Not with your clear name, but you have to have some kind of a name, and you have to have some kind of a wallet address in order to participate in governance, to make proposals, to vote against or for proposals, right? And what the cool innovation here is that these guys now started introducing zero knowledge proofs to have fully anonymous voting and also fully anonymous debate around their proposals. So someone can step in and make a proposal, and people can see this is a contributor of the Nouns DAO, and he's a Nouns token holder, or an NFT holder in that case. But people cannot see who exactly that wallet is or who exactly that person is. And I think this will really lead the way for a lot more DAOs to come to introduce mechanisms like that, where people can really anonymously voice their opinions, and where you might go beyond just like having different political fractions within DAOs, but more into just looking purely at the idea space and not so much at like specific leaders of a DAO. And another point which I wanted to address when it comes sort of to the future of DAOs and where things are headed, because right now we've really seen like a couple of DAOs where the idea of DAO governance got conflated with fiat governance. Two famous examples here are Constitution DAO and also Spice DAO. You probably heard of them. Constitution DAO got together to buy the US Constitution. They failed at it, unfortunately. Spice DAO got together and bought a copy of a script for a never-produced Dune movie, and they thought this would give them the IP rights to actually produce that movie themselves. So in both cases, we had DAOs that kind of thought they would have an impact in the real world by organizing online and by organizing through being a DAO. But eventually, that was unfortunately not the case. And I think, well, now you can laugh about it and say like, haha, they're so stupid, they don't know IP law. But what if this would actually change and DAO governance would actually mean fiat governance? And I think what we're seeing here is another emerging trend, which is that DAOs kind of emerge as new legal forms. We're already seeing this in, for example, Wyoming, where you can incorporate now as a Wyoming DAO. But I think beyond that, DAOs will really grow into completely new sort of organisms online. where DAO contributors can organize together with several different DAOs and maybe even form something like a network of DAOs, which could have a taxation system, for instance, to fund public goods, to fund public spaces for people who are like contributing to these DAOs. And maybe eventually one day this could really lead to something that is then being recognized by other states as this new sort of infrastructure and landscape that is emerging online. And maybe one day we will even see DAOs as new countries. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. That was really fun, and hit me up later if you have any questions.
Thank you, Marlene.